Some people have religious beliefs or whatever it is, and it drives them, and they're doing it for God. But it doesn't really matter who you're doing it for, or whoever you're doing it for. It should be something which nurtures you.
Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman podcast. On today's show, we have Bernie Roth, who is a professor over at Stanford University. He's the author of The Achievement Habits, which you can find on Amazon and in the show notes of this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And on today's show, I'm asking Bernie what being a high achiever actually means, both in sales and out of sales, and how, if we're not a high achiever, how we can get there and become one. Again, you can find everything we talk about in the show notes of this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, Bernie, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hi, Will. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you on, mate. One of my favorite topics today, in the grander topic of success in business life and just everything in between, we're going to talk essentially about achievement habits and a whole lot more. So I want to start the show, and this is clearly a leading question, or I think it is anyway. I want to start the show by asking you, Bernie, are high achievers, the people that, myself and others in the audience kind of aspire to have that title and be given that title by others, are high achievers, have they learned that skill of success over time, or is this something that is deep within their DNA and is something that's very difficult to replicate?
Well, I have to caution you. I use the word achievement a little bit differently than most people. So you seem to be using achievers in the standard sense of becoming king of the universe. And I have a friend who said to me, I'd never buy a book with achievement in the title, but it's not that. What I mean by achievement is a good life. And you get to define what you mean by a good life. So if being CEO is a good life for you, I want to help you get there. If being the janitor is a good life for you, I want to help you get there. So it's really just what I say is I want it to be so when you die and your friends are eulogizing you, they don't have to lie. They can just say the truth, how you were, and that you had a good life and you felt good about it and people felt good about you and you got whatever success you wanted. So it's a broader use of the term. And in that, to answer your question now, which is whether you're born with it or you somehow can gain it, I think you can gain it. I mean, some people are born with certain abilities and they use it and they capitalize them. Some are born with some abilities and they never use them. So it's really a matter of how you take whatever you have and work it. And, what I'm trying to do is use life lessons so people become aware of what they have and make the best of it.
For sure. We are totally on the same wavelength with the word achievement. Perhaps I jumped ahead of myself here, and we'll take it a step back, because I spend seemingly half my time on the show telling the audience of B2B sales professionals to get out of sales, because it isn't suited for everyone. And I think a lot of salespeople fall into the role. The money's good, and so they continue doing it. They build up all kinds of mortgages or debt in whatever way, or they have responsibilities in having children and things of that nature. And then you are stuck in this role that you're not suited to and you might not enjoy. So we are on the same wavelength for this. So let's pull this back a step kind of backwards, or 15 step backwards then, Bernie. For the audience, to give them a bit of context here, how do they know if they are in the right spot? How do they know if sales is, it doesn't have to be sales, because there's marketers, there's other people that listen, entrepreneurs. How do they know if that's the right thing for them? And then we'll move forward of how perhaps we can accelerate the progress.
The way I know it, I know I'm in the right place because I get up every morning and I'm anxious to go to work. And I've been doing the same job more or less for many, many years. And there have been only 1 or 2 days when I wondered why I was there. I feel that I've achieved where I was meant to be. So I think it's just you know it in your gut. If it's something you're dreading doing, or you're doing it because of others, or you have to do it, it's probably the wrong thing for you. And it's the thing that if it motivates you and it's rewarding, you know it. So it's not as they say, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's just human feelings and doing it. And some people are really lucky to get a lot of joy out of their work. They get it's not only fulfilling, it's essentially like a high. It's like sex or something like that for them. And I think that's what you want to aim for within the context of what you're doing.
And let me just clarify something here, because I think there's often misconceptions about this. You're not saying that your job role, your life in general should be easy. You're saying that you should be motivated to do it.
You should love doing it. Just as an example, I wrote my book. I got up every morning at 6. I usually sleep in very late, but I knew I was going to do it. I got up at 6 in the morning every morning, and I just was anxious to do it. It was a chore. I had a year off from a sabbatical, and I just got up and did it. And it was what I was doing then. And now I'm back on my normal job. I'm anxious to go in. I'm looking forward to the first meeting in the morning. I'm looking forward to seeing the people I work with. I'm looking forward to what I'm doing. So it's just this, I call it a life energy. Some people have religious beliefs or whatever it is, and it drives them, and they're doing it for God. But it doesn't really matter who you're doing it for, or whoever you're doing it for. It should be something which nurtures you, and you're not waiting for the reward in heaven or after you die. It's a matter of every day being, and not every minute, and it could be very hard. It isn't that it has to be easy. It could be, but the burden shouldn't be this kind of burden that knocks you down, and it's like a big weight on you. It should be, I have a job to do. It's like a workout. Like I take a yoga class. Yes, I take a power yoga class. And I looked at it and I figured, I'm like 60 years older than the instructor. I don't have to do all the things she does. But the point simply is it's a near-death experience every time. But when I'm done, I'm thrilled. I just have such a great feeling about it, and that's what you want to do. Well, it's sort of like climbing a mountain or running a marathon. Those are more extreme things, but these are things people do that are really taxing and really hard. But yet, it's sort of the endorphins flow. You want this stuff, whatever it is, serotonin, dopamine. You want these neurotransmitters firing in a way that give you pleasure, and you can get it by. It doesn't have to be easy. Easy is, it's kind of irrelevant if it's easy or hard.
So I like this, and I like this conversation, and I like sales for this reason. So I, even though I'm doing the podcast and essentially entrepreneur that runs a media company at this current moment in time, I'm still selling, so I'm very close. Hopefully by the time this comes out, Bernie, it will have closed and now they've been paid and it'll be fantastic. But I'm very close to closing a 6-figure deal to bring on a partner to kind of help support the show and to take us places and do different things and kind of take things to the next level. So I love the fact that it's really hard to get these conversations, to get these intros. You've got to pitch people, you've got to drag a lot of these companies through the kind of internet lens of media of an attention versus a lot of these companies I'm dealing with right now on this project are used to TV advertising, for example. So what I'm doing makes very little sense to them until you take them through that journey. So this is all difficult. But then you get, as you described, this rush of, I don't know which comes first, but the serotonin or the dopamine, which gives you that high, which then drops you back down and kind of encourages you to do it all over again. And there's obviously a survival mechanism there. And that's why I love sales specifically. But let me ask you this, Bernie. How much of all of this, everything that we just described, is engineered in our own minds? Should we be focusing on finding the right role, or should we be focusing on whether we're slightly more pessimistic about the role or whether we are forcing ourselves to be more optimistic about the role? How much of it is the physical, like day to day, and how much of it is engineered in our own brains?
Well, in my view, you give everything in your life its meaning. So it's all in your brain. So nothing has any meaning other than what you choose to give it. So one of my favorite examples is people may think they love their child because they're the mother or the father of the child. But, well, and that seems normal, right? But in fact, some mothers or fathers kill their children. I mean, they abuse them, some physically abuse them, some mentally abuse them, some kill. So this whole idea of loving your child, even though there may be some chemistry and some DNA and all that, it's still a choice you've made. And people don't give themselves the credit for the choice, for all the positive things in their lives. They're not because they had to do them, you know. So it's really an interesting example. And the same is for your job, the same is for your marriage, the same is for all your friendships. You have given those your meaning. And there's, you know, it's a great example. If you have a couple, I have a friend who's getting divorced now. So I was around when he first met his wife and when they were courting and all that. And he thought she was the most wonderful person in the world. Now, suddenly, he's decided she's the most awful person in the world. She hasn't changed at all. I know them both. It's just the meaning he's given that relationship. And that's a great example of what happens. And the job is the same thing. You could have a job and it's wonderful, and then suddenly something switches in you and it's awful and you can't stand it anymore. Then it's time to change, clearly. Or you can have a job that's awful and you can change it, really. It's so interesting. It's really in your brain, your makeup, and how you hold it. So I think I have a saying: nothing has any meaning, meaning that you give everything the meaning it has. People think that that's a negative statement. I view it as a positive statement because that makes you godlike, right? You can choose how everything is in your life. And I'm not saying to be like, you know, oh, la, 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 la about it. I'm just saying in a serious way, you have to realize you holding it in a certain way. And you could hold most things in a different way.
So I want to, clearly the crux of the conversation is going to be how we can implement this. And then perhaps at the end of the show, and I don't know how in depth you thought about this, but we can perhaps then touch on how we can give, or if we can give without manipulating people, but, you know, on the verge of influencing here, how we can give meaning to other people and, you know, persuade and influence them from that perspective and see if this is transferable. Because I know when I speak to someone, and they are, you know, whether it's in the sales or business or just when you meet someone in a queue and they're super excited about something, it gets me super excited. So there's obviously a transference of emotions that can happen there. So Bernie, take us through the process, if there is a step-by-step process, if it's possible. Take us through the process of how we can, let me put it in context for the audience. How, say that we've got a customer and we know that they are a good person, but they are quite demanding. And we know long-term that they are going to be great for us, you know, the business relationship. But in the short term, we see them as a bit of a pain in the bum. They're a bit of a pain in the ass. And again, tell me if this isn't how it works, or if there isn't the right context to do this. But how would we give meaning to that and turn it from this person is a pain to this person is a long-term, you know, partner to my success?
Well, I don't think there's a process really. I think they're what are called mindsets, and those are more important. So one of my favorite mindsets is reasons are bullshit. So that all reasons for human behavior are basically made up because you can't possibly know why you do things. So you choose some reason that seems logical, and that's part of what's going on. So if you take these mindsets, another mindset is have a bias towards action, to doing stuff rather than talking about it or thinking about it, and you apply those to any situation, and you're mindful of what's going on, then you can do something. So in the example you talked about, you know, I've been in situations where it's just not going well. You know, the person's a pain in the ass and all that. And what I find works best for me, I'm kind of honest with how I feel, how it makes me feel. So I don't, you know, I'd say, you know, it's like we don't have to like each other, but we have to get this thing done. So once you take out that whole idea, and you can just see yourself, you see how you're reacting, and you realize this is going badly. I have to turn this around, and there are various ways of doing that. So, but the most important way is to be mindful and to realize what's going on you. So if I say I'm on edge, I'm getting nasty, and I'm kind of lying to the person, and I'm trying to manipulate the person, and all that, I would sort of take a time out and regroup. And I've had that many times, and it's amazing how these things turn around. And sometimes there are external things that turn it around. It just came to mind. There was a horrible situation. I was in a hired limo in Israel going down from the airport, and it was a bad arrangement because we had a big fight over the price, and we had very hard feelings. And then suddenly there was an incident on the road with some soldiers bleeding and all that, and we ended up throwing a wounded soldier into the car, and at that point we bonded. And I invited him up to my apartment to wash up and all. So it was an example where there was an external event which totally changed the dynamic. Well, that same thing can happen just with you and the person. I've had that many times by just saying honest how you feel. So if I say, I feel you're giving me a really hard time here. It's really, I'm just trying to assist you here and telling you the best I know. If it's something more, I can call someone to help us, or if it's not a good day for you, maybe we should talk tomorrow. But just you don't say you're an asshole. But you say,
well, that's one way to go about it. Probably not the best way.
We should take responsibility for ourselves, I would say, not for the other. But we should take responsibility for the other person's reaction a little bit also. It is a two-way street, but really most people tend to blame the others, or they don't put themselves in the other person's shoes. We call it empathy in my business. And if you have a little bit of empathy, it goes a long way. And if most people are egocentric, which is sort of natural, but if you're kind of on goal as to what your intention is to have a relationship leading to a sale, or whatever your motive is, then you have to realize the other person has to get something out of it also. And it's not you want a so-called win-win situation. And part of the way is to, even if in your mind you're accusing them, to actually make yourself guilty too. And I find there's a tool. If you're aware of the idea of projection, it's so important. So if you say to yourself, like, let's say you and I are having a conversation, and what goes through my mind is that Will is a pain in the ass to me. No, just an example. But if I reverse that, and I say I'm a pain in the ass to Will, in my mind, I will get a lot of clarity, because usually it takes two to tango. Okay. And if you do that, it's just a simple reversal of subject and object. It gives you clarity. And if I realize I'm being a pain, it may well be you were a pain in the ass to me, but if I realize I'm also being a pain in the ass to you, then I'm going to alter the way I'm going to deal with this, because I'm going to want to remove that aspect of it. So I'd say there are two really important things. One is be aware of how that you're giving everything its meaning, and just speak from how you feel. Don't speak from correct or how the other person feels. And the other is, in your mind, do a reversal. If you find there's an accusation going on, do a reversal and check out this whole idea of projection. And those two things tend to give you a lot of clarity, and I find they're useful tools.
For sure. I appreciate that. And Bernie, earlier on, and I've scribbled two things down here. I want to cover one, and we've covered another one a bunch of times in the show, but maybe inadvertently, I don't know, maybe consciously you did this. But you mentioned two key concepts of sales, one of which is that things happen, typically emotionally in the moment, and then because we don't want to look stupid, we don't want to feel out of control, we give a logical reason for that. So we talk about this all the time in sales, of people tend to buy with emotion, and then they justify it with logic, which is why we get buyer's remorse of, if someone's wrapped up in the moment, they buy something, then a week later, they realize that they were wrapped up in the moment, it was a stupid decision. They find it very difficult to add logic to it, and so they have buyer's remorse, and clearly that's not a position that we want to be in from salesperson sales professional to buyer. We want long-term relationships here. But we covered that on the show before. Something that you also mentioned was this idea of we should have a bias towards action. And one of my mentors and sales managers of old, when I was in medical device sales, he said to me, and I'm going to mess up how he said it, as he said it really poetically. I remember the moment he said it to me in this restaurant in this hotel that we were in. He said, essentially, great salespeople show their customers value by doing and not saying. Kind of like alluding to poor salespeople,
yes,
which is the analogy you gave before of they will give all this gift of the gab, they'll say all these things, but then nothing materializes. And clearly that's not what I want to promote to my audience. So, Bernie, I'm excited now because this ties in directly with experience I've had. And I've never had a way to put this into practice other than consciously forcing myself to take action and action and action. Is there a way to develop a skill set or to kind of enable ourselves to be biased towards action rather than kind of either procrastination at its worst or in the middle ground is just when we overthink things?
Well, we call it, one of the things we call is prototyping. So prototyping is just trying stuff out, okay? And you're trying stuff out to get more information. So instead of thinking and, waiting to do something, you just try it out a little bit and see what happens. And usually you get some information. And even if it doesn't work, you now know to go in a different direction. So the bias towards action idea links in with the whole idea of you really don't know. I mean, if you know what to do it. It's simple as that. But if you don't know what to do and you think you need a lot of more information before you do it, it might be better to just attempt to do something. And even if it doesn't work, you can learn from that and retrack what you're doing and do something else. So we find that in all sorts of problem solving, that a really good step forward is to just move forward and not just sit and think and think and think and think. And it gets you there much more quickly often, and it gets you there in a better way because you have to get the real world experience, not just your concept of what it is, to see what's really going on.
What do you say to those people that, I agree with you, but I'm going to play devil's advocate slightly. What do you say to those people that go, well, I don't want to put a half-baked idea or project in front of people because I don't want to come across, I guess, like either I'm not trying hard enough or that I'm not capable of doing the full project? How would you relay that message is the wrong message?
They may be right. I don't know, but however,
I appreciate that. I appreciate
that. It can be, but in general, it doesn't work that way. It does work that you learn from it and you correct from it and you get things. We have an example of some students they made up an app and they weren't going to launch it because it wasn't perfect yet. And my colleagues insisted that they launch it. And it wasn't perfect. And they launched it and it went to the top of the charts, and they just sold the company for $90 million.
Wow.
And if they'd done that in the traditional business way, they'd still be getting all the bugs out of it. So we have a lot of examples like that just by going ahead and learning by doing, even though it isn't fully done, and even though there are things that need to be improved, you can improve it as you go along, and it gets better, and people appreciate that. So it's not, you can say anything, and probably you can find an example where anything is true. But our experience is, in the main, it does pay to move forward, even though it's, it is, you don't want to build an airplane and have it fall out of the sky. But within most things, reason they're not going to fall out of the sky, and most things it's okay. There is some tolerance, and it can be improved. And if you do it with integrity and you take responsibility for it, it's fine. It's in this car situation I was talking about, I got a charging cable which was defective. But eventually it got straightened out, and I'm thrilled with the new one. So it's just a matter of cleaning up the mess. And if you make a mess, clean it up and have the integrity to stick behind it.
For sure. I think what you're alluding to here is everyone in the world of entrepreneurship, all the entrepreneurs and CEOs that are listening will understand this idea of the minimal viable product. but salespeople might not. And this is the idea of you should bring to market the smallest, least feature-packed, most streamlined, quickest to-market version of a product that you can. And then you've got actual feedback from people who are paying you versus your own brain, which is 99% nonsense because you are not the end customer most of the time. So I tried to do this with the podcast. So you'd laugh, Bernie, if you watched a couple of the shows that were done this time last year. The video was horrible. It was horrific. The sound quality was not great. And I have just made lots of iterations along the way. And I found with my audience, they love this journey. They love this iterative process. They like me pulling them in, and as I alluded to earlier on, I'm very close to closing this huge deal, which is going to lead to a professional built studio here in my flat. It's kind of going to lead me to do a lot more of the live events, which we've done. The first one in San Francisco a few weeks ago. If I would have had an analysis by paralysis of the show's got to be perfect when I launch, it just wouldn't have launched, and it wouldn't have gone anywhere. Yeah,
I couldn't have said it better. So I agree with everything you just said. That's my viewpoint. Also, you get a lot of the real-time feedback from users. Is really a wonderful way to move forward, not just in your head.
For sure, and I think salespeople can leverage this as well in that you've got multiple variables of within the world of sales. Perhaps 10 years ago, in the corporate B2B space, you'd be given, here's your presentation, here's the color tie you should wear, here's the list of people that you need to go and speak to, and this is how you do it. I think now with the work, there's a lot of my audience are millennials, and they are selling to millennials, and millennials seem, and this might be every generation ever and will continue forever, but it seems that millennials are more open to different types of exchanges of value. They're more open to having conversations and being consulted on versus this is the price, this is what we do. And I think that's the opportunity for the audience to add value to their potential customers. So this kind of ties in with that as well of you can experiment on pricing to a certain extent, but you can experiment on how much time you spend with people, the different types of communication platforms you communicate with them on. I just think there's a huge opportunity here for this iterative process within sales. And I think, this next 5 years, the people who do iterate are going to have more success than anyone in the past.
Yeah, well, that's sort of our approach to stuff, is exactly what you said. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Bernie, I've got one final question, mate, that I ask everyone that comes on the show, and then I want you to tell us a little bit about the book that we've been alluding to throughout the interview. So I know you're not a salesperson, straight down the middle like a lot of the audience, but you will have some sales insights on this, I'm sure. So, Bernie, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
Well, I have been a salesman when I was younger. I did door-to-door sales when I was in high school. So I was thinking back to those days. But I'd say in my life, I have very few regrets. But I'd say in certain relationships, I could have acted differently. And I'd say I do regret certain things when I let people down or I wasn't didn't fulfill my promises. So I would say the advice is live your life with as much integrity as you possibly can. And it's a little hard when you're a teenager and you don't have that viewpoint. But when you get older, I think hopefully you get it. And I'd say that's the main thing, to just getting back to the whole idea of do the right thing, and hopefully you'll get a fair shake out of life.
Does that sum up the whole of the show here, Bernie? Should we be living a life that at the end of it we have as minimal number of regrets as possible? Is that the conclusion of all of this?
I think so. Yeah, I do think so. I mean, for me, it is. I can't speak for everybody, but I can for me. And, there's some people who have great achievements and all that, and I wouldn't want their lives. So, I guess it's a personal decision. But if you ask me, that's what I would suggest.
Good stuff. All right, then. Well, Bernie, tell us a little bit about the book and then where we can find it as well.
Probably the best place to buy it is Amazon. And It's called The Achievement Habit, and it's based in part on a class I've been teaching at Stanford for over 40 years. And it had to do with the idea of getting people to do something so that they wouldn't be reliant on professors, and they'd get the habit of doing stuff in their own lives. And it had to do with also getting rid of problems in your life. So the book deals with how to solve problems if you're stuck. It deals with this whole idea that you give everything in your life its meaning. It deals with this whole idea that reasons for human behavior are bullshit, and it deals with the language, that some language we use is self-defeating, some language can be positive, and it goes through just a set of processes in almost every situation you encounter in companies or at home or just in your life. So it's a kind of self-help book based on the principles of what we call design thinking, using those ideas in a way that people before hadn't used them. In general, people use them to design products, and I use them to get a better life.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Bernie, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks, Will. Good luck to you.